People that heard Bill's music felt that connection. Even if they'd never met the man, there was a bond that was indelible and indestructible. As I mentioned in the book, the day he died, I got phone calls that whole week from people all over the world that I didn't even know. They wanted some connection still, but I understand exactly what you're talking about.
Hey, this is Dave Douglas for the Greenleaf Music Podcast, A Noise from the Deep. That was the voice of Joe LaBarbera, drummer who spent some incredible years with the Bill Evans Trio, with Mark Johnson. He has a book called Times Remembered about his time in the band. He co-wrote it with Charles Levin. And then we heard an unreleased version of Someday My Prince Will Come. It's the Bill Evans Trio. We'll be listening to unreleased Bill Evans Trio, as well as a track from Joe's own record called World Travelers. I don't even know where to begin with Joe LaBarbera's bio. I would send people to his website or to Wikipedia. He's played with so many greats and is still doing so, and I found this music really inspiring, and the conversation was really enjoyable and wonderful. So I hope you enjoy it. Come on over to greenleafmusic.com. Please subscribe, join up. You'll get all of these episodes and all the records that we do on Greenleaf Music. Once again, enjoy this chat with the great Joe LaBarbera. Joe LaBarbera, man, it's amazing to talk to you. And it's taken us some time to get our schedules to collide. But when I read your book was when I really felt, I wanted to delve into some of the things in it. Of course, you can never say everything, but this book, Time Remembered, about your time with the Bill Evans Trio, with Mark Johnson, co-authored with Charles Levin. It's a real great read, and I recommend it to everybody. You sent me all this unreleased Bill Evans music that you played with him in the late 70s. I thank you so much. It's incredible. The thing that we heard that I opened the show with is Someday My Prince Will Come from a concert at Harvard. I guess that would have been in 1979.
Where's the poster? It's here somewhere. Yeah, I believe it was 79.
It's
I believe
great.
it was
Beautiful
79.
performance.
I've got the exact date in the book, but
Okay, all right, great.
that was with John Lewis. He was hosting that evening, and he and Bill on the second half of the concert played solo duo pianos, and it was outstanding. I wish I had a recording of that.
All of these things that you sent, most of which I hadn't heard, it strikes me, and this is something you talk about in the book, that Bill seems to just start the tune. There's never a count off, and it's usually just him, and then you guys come in as you see fit. Was it that way right from the first time you played with him?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Even your audition at the Village Vanguard.
It was as if, I mean, it wasn't even like it was an audition. It was like he starts to play, you jump in and do what you can do. I mean, yeah, it reminds me in a stylistically different way of Count Basie, because Count Basie started every song because he wanted that tempo just right. Bill would start it because he wanted the mood just right.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, you refer to him as the rock, the foundation. You talk about that, being a band leader yourself, and having recently released a record called World Travelers. But how did that work in the case of Bill? I mean, I guess he was just so strong musically. You were just there.
That's exactly right, Dave. I mean, you couldn't go wrong with this guy. If you were of a certain level, you just had to be a competent player, obviously. If you were of a competent level, you couldn't miss, man. I mean, because he would carry you the whole time. And then once you got your feet wet and felt more confident and comfortable, then you could start to stretch out and really start to add something to the music.
Huh. By that, do you mean like the whole interplay concept that maybe was introduced by his first trio?
Exactly right, but he wanted it to be a personal contribution, not something that one of the other trio members had played previously. He didn't want a recreation of any previous trios, except in concept and hopefully in spirit. And that's, I think, what he found with Mark Johnson and myself. He found that spirit that he was looking for, and that kind of inspired him, I believe, to grow even further in those last 2 years.
Yeah, it is kind of remarkable, the playing that he does. I was going to play thing that you sent on In Your Own Sweet Way from Vancouver, 1979. I don't think I've ever heard him play that fast. Some of the lines, it's unbelievable.
It was amazing to be there and hear it as well, because you get used to a certain style of Bill Evans, or maybe a certain way that he was dealing, but it was all in there. And my sense was that I knew it was in there, and he just was waiting to come out. So I think I played a little more heavy-handed than some of the other drummers that had been with him. I was prodding him a little bit because I was tapping into his bebop roots. I mean, all the drummers were great, and they all found a way to get something out of Bill Evans. But I was going all the way back to the beginning, because I could just tell that it was there. And I know he didn't want to be a straight-ahead piano player. I mean, that, you know what I mean when I say straight ahead. but he wanted some of that in the music, I believe.
I'm curious enough to ask what you mean when you say a straight ahead piano player.
Well, in other words, if you listen to the very first record, New Jazz Conceptions, where he's showing his debt to Bud Powell, even though he's got his own thing going. But there is that style of Bud Powell playing that is influencing what he was doing at the time. And so that was in there, and there's a lot more straight ahead uh, playing on that album. Tunes like Five and um,
Nah,
Night
Night and Day, right? Is the opener, I
Night and
think.
Day is on Everybody Digs.
Oh,
Uh,
right, right.
I Love You,
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's there. So that was something that I was looking for. I wanted to bring that out. I remember Elvin said to me, when I told him I got the job, he said, "Oh man, you're gonna have to play quiet all night long." And I thought, I don't know about that, man. I think I'm going to be able to play out. And sure enough, man,
Yeah.
right away I could tell.
Well,
I,
it's beautiful on these recording. Like I didn't hear this trio live, of course, and when you go to Styx, it's both noticeable and like viscerally exciting. Like you feel the electricity pick up.
well, well, thank you for that. That's like I say, you really couldn't go wrong with this guy if you just kept your ears open.
But all of his trios, and I certainly don't want to harp on any of this, but I just wonder, a lot of people, general listeners, but also, people who love Bill and his music like I do. There was something about the Sunday at the Village Vanguard, the trio with Scott LaFaro and Paul Motian, and I wonder if you felt like that was maybe a departure, and if that set a roadmap for the way you thought about it. I'm sure Paul must have been an inspiration for you.
Oh, absolutely. Those albums had a huge impact on me early on. And once again, what I was looking for, and what I've always looked for when I have studied other great musicians, is not what they played, but the spirit that they're playing it in, and how I could tap into some of that spirit. And I mean, Paul opened a lot of doors for every drummer, but I got to be honest with you, Dave. Scott LaFaro was my role model for that trio. I wanted that. There was something special going on between Bill and Scott that I thought maybe I could get at with the drums as well. I was trying to get that direct connection uh, with Bill. So Scott was a huge influence on me, but Paul Motian is directly responsible for all of us. I feel, playing time as a phrase as opposed to time as a beat.
Wow, interesting. Do you think that in some sense opened up the interplay between Bill and Scott LaFaro? The way that they would trade in unusual ways melodic lines within the form, within the structure.
It's certainly possible because I think Paul could play in such a way that it was a foundation for Bill and Scott to take a lot of chances, and yet it wasn't predictable, and it wasn't wallpaper. He was really interacting with them, so it's possible that there was an influence on what they were doing.
Yeah, you certainly opened that door for Mark Johnson and Bill as well. And all of these tunes, it's kind of remarkable. They're not the best, high tech audio fidelity recordings, and yet you hear everybody so clear. And I feel like that's a musical choice that Bill and Mark was very active. And a lot of times it was recorded with the DI, so it doesn't, you're not really hearing the instrument like you might like, but the interplay is pretty remarkable. Right from, having started with Someday My Prince Will Come, and just the second chord that they play is such a beautiful substitution that Mark seems to somehow emphasize every time in different ways.
Yeah, I think that's a D7, and he's got that open string that just
Yeah,
things
something.
out.
I didn't go to the piano to take it apart, but I will, because it's really exciting and beautiful. But also, I mean, that version of In Your Own Sweet Way is super interactive, and maybe that's why Bill went so crazy. Like, I don't remember having heard him do. Within the interlude before his solo, I think it's E flat minor for 8 bars, and he's just, it's a launch pad.
If you remember from the book, that concert happened on the heels of a disastrous concert in Calgary where the piano was so bad that we literally walked out of the venue and did not perform, right?
Wow. Really?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The piano was so trash. Broken ivories, broken strings.
Do we want to name names here, Joe?
Oh, it's all in the book. I mean,
no, I mean who the promoter is and why.
the man is passed. He's actually passed on. But in fairness, Charles and I reached out to him and reached out to other people in Calgary who were there at the time. So we've got points of view. We back everything up. But the fact is, Dave, I wouldn't sit down to this piano, and neither would you. So to ask Bill Evans to do it, and he was being very reasonable. Mm-hmm. He told this guy, if you can get a technician in here and have him work on the piano between now and 8 o'clock, and we're talking about an hour and a half's time, right? Yeah. He said, I'll give you one set. And the guy wouldn't do it. So anyway,
wow.
There was this disastrous event in Calgary. So the next night we arrive in Vancouver, and there's a piano on stage that had been gloriously restored by this technician who was also doing the audio for us that night. And Bill was in heaven. He had a good instrument. We had a full house. He felt like playing, and there it was, man. That's another point that I make a few times in the book about how if you give an artist the right equipment, and in the case of a pianist like Bill Evans, he deserves a good piano, you're going to get a spectacular performance. You're going to get more than your money's worth, and the audience is going to come away feeling like they've experienced something great.
Did they ever bring him an electric piano in that period?
No, never had to do that.
Right, because Helen Keane, his manager, probably headed him off at the pass.
Yeah, and Helen was hard-nosed, and she would press these points. But even so, you could have everything nailed down before you left New York, but once you arrive in the middle of nowhere, and the reality is, here's what you got, and then it's another story.
Well, that used to happen in New York. I'm sure it still does happen.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, it's a beautiful recording. I thought we could listen to But Beautiful, and that's live in Germany from, I guess, a similar period. But it reminded me of a story that it might have been Michael's book, Michael Wolff, because he was friendly with Bill also. And I talked to him for this show too.
Oh, yeah.
And he was trying to figure out how to play tunes. And he took him to the diner and they were sitting there. And Bill finally, as you describe a lot of personal interactions in your book that are great and heartwarming. And that he wouldn't, you guys never talked about the music or rarely, and not certainly on stage or anything like that. And I guess Bill one night got tired of Michael asking him these questions, and he said, well, look, you're trying to learn Stella. It's simple. Just you play the melody and you play the bass line, and then you add one voice in the middle, one of the chord tones, and that's it. Now you've spelled the whole thing, and then you take it from there and go and do whatever you want to do. And it was funny that you're talking about how he never showed people voicings because he wanted them to find it on their own. And yet he passed this little gem that I think is kind of a giant, Vesuvius in terms of understanding the music. And
it really is, because what he did for Mike is he showed him the approach that he took. He used to say, I built my harmonic concept step by step. So by that he meant there's that root, and here's the first note of the melody, and now I'm going to fill in as I'm hearing it, right? What I'm hearing with this music. And the fact that he had the tools, because he always credited his education at Southeastern, and Gretchen McGee in particular, his theory teacher, he credited those two with the ability to be able to think on his own and be able to fill in those blanks. But it wasn't like a formula, like here's a voicing I'm going to use every time. It wasn't like that with him. He built it step by step for each tune.
You talk about how he would use the word architecture, building the way, I guess, everything, the arrangements, the way that he voiced the harmony, the way that he approached rhythm as well. You have any more thoughts about that?
I mean, that was his word was architecture. He said, if the architecture isn't correct for an arrangement or a composition, it's going to fail. And so he was very particular about making sure that it was complete. He had a phrase that he would apply to musicians that just tried to imitate what they were hearing. He would say they create kind of a veneer of the music. They haven't really dug deeply enough into it to fully understand it, because if you're in a hurry and you're trying to just get to a place where you can sound like something, it's possible to approximate it, but you're never going to really fully understand it. And that was his point of view. So his arrangements were the same from the 1955 recording of New Jazz Conceptions all the way up to this trio, because in his mind, once you had that fixed, that leaves all your energy free to focus on the good stuff, which is the blowing.
Yeah, but that leads me to ask, okay, so if his arrangements were the architecture that was fixed, and then that led him to the blowing, which for anybody who's listening who's not a musician, we use the word blowing to mean improvisation, usually in the structure of a tune, not always. Anyway, I know how many times I've said that word and people give me a blank stare. But anyway, the blowing, you talked to him a lot about practicing, about learning it, and yet it seems like once he got to the blowing, it was pretty hands-off. You use a phrase in the book that, as far as practice, putting in the work is the target. That he felt like it didn't come naturally to him. The talent that he had was to be able to work on it.
Yeah, he actually described it. When people would ascribe the word genius to him, he'd say, maybe the fact that I was willing to do the hard work was the genius part, just being willing to do it. Any great musician, I don't care who it is, Train, Miles, John Schofield, you pick one. They're going to tell you, you got to put the time in on the instrument. You've got to spend the time with your instrument. And then once you've got that happening, then you're free to explore. You're more capable to be able to explore.
But you're making it sound pretty technical, which I think I have the feeling from just the way he played, all of the rhythmic displacements and all of the reimagining the harmonies in every chorus and imagination of new melodies. It's like something he must have dug even deeper and maybe wasn't able to share. I don't know.
Oh no, he definitely, and he said that explicitly in many interviews. His harmonic concept he worked on hard. The rhythmic displacement he worked on very hard. But
So
the fact
like
is,
in the practice room, breaking that down and trying it in different
absolutely.
ways and
He thought it through. It wasn't just like, here's a device I'm going to use. I'll start the chord on the upbeat of one every time. No, or on the upbeat of four. It wasn't like that. It was about how much time he's going to spend on a harmony, how soon he wants to introduce it based on what he's improvising. So that was something he worked on very hard. But when I say the practice part, that's the practice part. To develop the control to be able to do that and the intellect to be able to follow through with it. Then when you get into the soloing, when you get into the improvisation, you don't have to think about it. It's going to come more naturally. It's going to flow.
yeah. That ballad it's gorgeous, and it reminds me of another thing that well, that you talk about in the book, but a lot of the reflections that you have, since it's a book about your time playing with Bill, and you certainly knew his music years before you started playing with him, there's a phrase that keeps coming up, getting out of the way. And I was listening to these trio tracks, and I was like, I'm trying to listen to you and think, is this Joe getting out of the way right here? Or how does that operate?
You're feeling it as you go, Dave. Every night it's different. But once you reach a level where the interplay is a little more natural and it comes a little more freely, then you don't have to focus on it quite so hard. But there were times when I would, if I was too repetitive, for example, with an idea, and Bill didn't like it, he would never say anything. He would just fill the spot where I was aiming for, and that would be like, oh, okay, I get it. He doesn't want me to play in that spot. He would just put a note there, and that was it. I only needed that one time, and then I would fix it.
Wow.
Next time, or I would leave it open the next time.
It's probably why you stayed with the group. Amazing. It's also part of the question that comes up a lot is when bands are multi-generational. Bill was older than you. You were older than Mark. And yet it sounds like you're all relating as equals. Was that the feeling for you?
Absolutely. And that should be possible, right? I mean, Art Blakey had youngsters his whole career, man. So it's got to be possible that you can have this kind of a makeup in a band. What's necessary is that for the younger generations to have some understanding of where you're coming from, and to have listened to your music and understand. Jeff Hamilton likes to say, do the homework, right? And it's true. If you want to be in Art Blakey's band, you got to listen to his music. You want to be in Bill Evans' trio, you've got to listen to his music so that you have an idea of what it is possibly that he might want from a drummer or a bass player.
You mentioned that at that audition at the Village Vanguard, audition, you basically played a set with him between your gig with Toots Thielmans. Yeah. And then you came off stage, and as you were running back to your gig with Toots, he says to you, well, it sounds like you know all my stuff.
He said, it sounds like you've been checking out my book.
Yeah.
And I said, man,
right.
I've been listening to you since I was 12 years old because it was true, But I didn't know those particular arrangements that he played set. It was just, like I said, Dave, he was so confident and so solid with his musical direction.
Yeah.
You just had to pay attention and you would get it right.
But I think like listening to each other as equals, even with Mark being, I don't know what, 10?
Mark is, think about that. How old is Mark? Damn. He was 24. No, he was 24 at the time and I was 30. So he's only 6 years.
Oh, okay. All right. Closer than but both younger than Bill. And he's certainly, taking you guys with him all around the world.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly a leadership figure. There's times in the book where you deal very tastefully, I think, with the difficult issue of what was going on with him with substance abuse and his health and all the things that came with that and all the, nothing's ever clear cut, all the confusion of that and different weird situations that it led to. I recommend the book for people because you don't sensationalize it. You tell in a very true way the kinds of things that happen with addiction and with, he wasn't really even old, but it was like his body was deteriorating because of all these habits over many years. And I just wonder if I could ask, I've never been in that situation as a musician myself. I've seen some things, but not to the extent that you're talking about here with Bill Evans. Do you feel like there were times on the bandstand that this full simpatico relationship musically and personally that we're talking about were threatened by what was happening for him.
Oh, maybe the worst of it was that the tempos would push really badly, and Marty used to say the same thing. I never talked to Elliot about it, but that was just something that was happening because of a particular substance that he was using. But it was also, I think, that it wasn't really that big a concern for him. Really, he had a lot to say that he wanted to get out, and he was in a hurry to do it because I think he knew in his heart that he had a short period
You mean
of time.
that the tempos we're pushing wasn't a big concern? He was okay with that? That's what you're saying?
I don't think it was a big concern for Bill, really. It really wasn't toward the end. And I think that's something that he was dealing with his whole life, quite frankly, because he makes reference to that early on when he's with Miles, but in any event, it never, and I think I make this statement in the book, it never impacted the substance of what he played. The actual music was always intact. Just maybe some of the technicality of, for a drummer. I mean, let's face it, what's going to rub us the wrong way worse than the time, being not under our control. So, but that's just something I had to deal with, and Mark, of course.
Wow. Super interesting. You sent me this piece called Reflections in D. It's from a Carnegie Hall concert from 1978 that was never released. Tell me about this.
That's a Duke Ellington tune that Bill actually tells the audience hardly anyone has heard this. No one else was playing it. And Bill put it on his album. I forget which one it was, but it was around that period of time in 1978. And I love that. And I love that performance. And the other thing that I probably should have sent you, because the whole setup for that concert is that it's the Newport Jazz Festival at Carnegie Hall, and Bill goes out on stage and tells the audience that they're going to have to make an adjustment with their ears because he's asked for the microphones to be turned off. He said, "This is Carnegie Hall, and I don't enjoy playing here with amplification." The crowd goes nuts because that's exactly what they wanted. And once everybody's adjusted their ears to what the volume is going to be, which is a Steinway piano in Carnegie Hall, I mean, what more could you ask for, right?
Right.
It's the same thing you mentioned about with the dynamics with the trio, like say at Harvard, where you realize that we're in control of the dynamics, not a sound person. The band is in control. So if we want to get quiet, you're still going to hear everything that you need to hear. And that's what Bill was after with that. And also when we recorded the album, We Will Meet Again with Larry Schneider and Tom Harrell.
Yeah.
Bill insisted on no headphones. We were all gathered together close at Columbia 30th Street, and we had to listen, not headphones. And it created a completely different atmosphere in the studio.
And did those horn players try to stand exactly where Miles and Train stood in the
your life they did. They walked in,
always curious.
And the first words out of Larry's mouth was, "Okay, but where did Train stand?" And so Bill said, "Well, I think Coltrane was here and Miles was there." And then so that was, I don't blame him. I would have wanted to stood there as well, man.
Bill was okay with that, obviously.
Oh, totally.
That's funny.
I'd like to conclude with a number that I recently recorded on my new Warner Brothers album. It's a Duke Ellington piece that I didn't know and doesn't seem to be that well known, but I think it's a beautiful gem called Reflections in D.
Wow. Yeah, Reflections in D. So just to segue, you've been a band leader for many years, but World Travelers, it's your
This
record.
band's been together for 30 years, Dave.
Really?
And, we don't really get out of town that much. Once in a while, we've been to a festival here and there, but really it's hard to take 5 people around. You know what I'm talking about, man. Hell. So
Sadly, yes.
the band is Clay Jenkins on trumpet,
Uh-huh. Wow.
Bob Shepard, tenor sax and soprano sax,
Yeah.
Bill Cunliffe at the piano, and Tom Warrington was the original bass player, but Tom moved to New Zealand about 10, 12 years ago. So I found a young bass player out here that I just love. His name is Jonathan Richards, and he's been in the band now for a long time. Actually, I forget how long. Sometimes my wife has to remind me. Yeah, Joe, he's been there. He's been with you guys for 12 years.
Well, he's still the new guy.
He's still the new guy, yeah. But that's the band.
Wow. Well, it sounds great. And what label is this on?
This is a new label that started up out here. There's a club called Sam First
Uh-huh.
that a
In
lot
LA,
of people
in Los
on
Angeles.
both coasts are aware of, because a lot of your buddies from New York are coming through here and playing there.
Great.
And the owner, Paul Solomon, and his first lieutenant, Dave Robert, who's a wonderful bass player, are in charge of this whole operation. And Dave's kind of the hands-on, day-to-day guy. But they approached me about doing a live recording at the club. Peter Erskine's done a live recording there with George Garzone. Gerald Clayton's done one. Justin Coughlin, the young piano player, has done one. So they're starting to build a roster, and I'm happy that we were asked to do it, and I'm excited about this record.
We're happy to hear it, Joe. It's amazing.
Thanks, Dave.
And thank you so much for making the time. It's great. Everyone should go get this book. It's called Times Remembered. And yeah, hearing this music, boy, there's so much fire in it. And it's great that you were able to share all these remembrances. So thank you so much for coming and hang out for a sec, because we're going to talk about Charles Ives.
Oh, great.
In the extra
Got it,
for
Dave.
the subscribers. Thanks for listening to this interview for A Noise from the Deep. Join us for the extra by becoming a subscriber at greenleafmusic.com, where you can hear me and Joe talking about Charles Ives and the Adagio from his First Symphony. Thanks for listening. Have a good one.